The rain hammered against the pavement as Lucy Bennett rushed toward Mason's Market, her coat pulled tight around her shoulders. The evening sky had turned an angry shade of gray, matching the mood of hurried shoppers seeking shelter from the downpour. Water dripped from her honey-blonde hair as she pushed through the store's glass doors. Grateful for the warmth inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Lucy grabbed a small basket. Planning to pick up just enough groceries for dinner, she moved through the aisles, selecting pasta, sauce, and fresh vegetables when she heard a soft, troubled voice near the checkout counter. An elderly man stood there, his worn coat hanging loose on his thin frame. His weathered hands trembled as he emptied his pockets, counting pennies and dimes on the counter. The cashier waited patiently, but several customers behind him shifted impatiently. The old man, who Lucy would later know as George Harrison, looked increasingly distressed as he recounted his change for the third time. Lucy watched as he began removing items from his small pile of groceries, bread, milk, and basic necessities. Without thinking twice, she stepped forward, placing her basket beside his items. "Please let me help," she said softly, pulling out her wallet. The old man looked up, his pale blue eyes filled with a mixture of embarrassment and gratitude. "I couldn't possibly," he whispered. But Lucy had already handed her card to the cashier. "It would make my day to help," she insisted gently. As the transaction completed, the old man gathered his bags with shaking hands. He turned to Lucy, his eyes glistening. "Thank you, dear child. Such kindness is rare these days." Before she could respond, he shuffled toward the exit. Disappearing into the curtain of rain, Lucy paid for her own groceries. Unaware that this simple act of kindness would soon change her life forever, Lucy arrived home as the storm grew stronger, the wind howling through the trees that lined her small street. She placed her wet umbrella by the door and began unpacking her groceries in her modest kitchen. The house felt peaceful despite the weather outside, with only the gentle ticking of her grandmother's old clock keeping her company as she started boiling water for pasta. Bright headlights swept across her living room walls. Through her rain-streaked windows, she watched 3 black cars, sleek and expensive, pull up in front of her house. The vehicles looked out of place in her quiet neighborhood of simple homes and family sedans. Her heart began to race as men in dark suits emerged from the cars, opening black umbrellas against the rain. The last person to step out caught her attention immediately. He was older, perhaps in his 50s, wearing an impeccable gray suit and carrying himself with unmistakable authority. He led the group up her walkway. Lucy wiped her hands on a kitchen towel, trying to calm her nerves. The doorbell rang, its chime echoing through her small house. She approached the door cautiously, peeking through the side window. The man in the gray suit stood at the front, its expression serious but not threatening. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door. The man smiled warmly, surprising her with its genuineness. "Good evening, Miss Bennett," he said, his voice rich and cultured. "I apologize for this unexpected visit. My name is William Harrison. I believe you met my father earlier today at Mason's Market." Lucy's mind flashed back to the elderly man in his trembling hands. She nodded slowly, wondering how these men had found her address. William Harrison gestured to the rain. "May we come in? I have something important to discuss with you about my father." Lucy led the visitors into her living room, where William Harrison and 2 of his men took seats, while others remained standing. The rain continued to drum against the windows as William began to explain. His father, George Harrison, was not the poor man he had appeared to be at the store. In fact, he was once the most celebrated violin maker in the country, whose instruments were played in concert halls worldwide. "My father has been different since my mother passed," William said, his voice softening. "He refuses to live with me, insisting on maintaining his independence. Sometimes he wanders off, leaving his wallet behind on purpose. He says he wants to see if there is still kindness in the world." Lucy listened, remembering the gentle old man's grateful eyes. William reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "What you did today touched him deeply. He asked me to give you this." Inside the envelope was an invitation to visit George's workshop, a place few people had ever seen. "Father hasn't let anyone into his workshop in years," William explained. "He says he's been waiting for someone worthy to share his life's work with. Someone who shows genuine kindness without expecting anything in return." Lucy held the invitation with trembling hands. "I don't understand," she said. "I only did what anyone would do." William smiled and shook his head. "That's exactly why he chose you. We've watched dozens of people walk past him in similar situations. You were the first to help without hesitation." He stood up, straightening his suit. "The address is on the invitation. Father will be expecting you tomorrow at 10. He wants to show you something special, something he calls the heart of music itself." William paused, looking at Lucy with genuine respect. "You've given an old man hope again, Miss Bennet." The following weeks transformed Lucy's life in ways she never imagined. Every afternoon after teaching her kindergarten class, she would visit George's workshop, a beautiful Victorian building filled with the scent of wood and varnish. George taught her about the art of violin making, showing her how each instrument held its own unique voice. One rainy afternoon, as George was showing Lucy his collection, he pulled out a violin with a distinctive maple scroll. "This one," he said, his eyes bright with memory, "was played by a remarkable young woman in the symphony 30 years ago." Lucy's breath caught as he continued. "Her name was Margaret Bennet." "That was my grandmother," Lucy whispered, touching the violin's smooth surface. George nodded, smiling warmly. "I knew from the moment you helped me. You have her spirit, her kindness." As days turned to weeks, George shared more than just his craft. He told stories of his late wife Claire, who had been his inspiration for creating such beautiful instruments. "She could hear the soul in every piece of wood," he said, "just like you can." William visited often, watching with growing admiration as Lucy learned his father's art. He saw how she listened patiently to George's stories, how she handled each violin with reverence, and how she brought light back into his father's eyes. One evening, as Lucy practiced on her grandmother's violin, George watched with tears in his eyes. "Claire would have loved you," he said quietly. "You understand what these instruments truly mean. They're not just wooden strings, they're vessels for human emotion." Lucy felt at peace in the workshop, surrounded by half-finished violins and the tools of George's trade. She had found not just a mentor, but a second father in George, and something unexpected was growing between her and William, something that made her heart sing like the finest violin. George passed away peacefully in his sleep 6 months after meeting Lucy, leaving behind a legacy that would touch countless lives. In his will, he left Lucy his entire collection of handcrafted violins and his beautiful Victorian mansion, along with a letter that brought tears to her eyes. "My dear Lucy," the letter read, "you showed kindness to a stranger and brought music back into my life. These violins need someone who understands their soul. Like Claire, you hear the music in everything. Please keep their songs alive." With William's help, Lucy transformed the mansion into a music school for children who couldn't afford lessons. They named it the Harrison School of Music and filled its rooms with the sound of young musicians learning to play. The walls that once held George's solitary work now echoed with laughter and music. Lucy kept George's workshop exactly as it was, using it to teach advanced students about the craft of violin making. She often found herself standing in that room, running her fingers over the tools he had used for decades, feeling his presence in every corner. William remained by her side through everything, their shared love for George and music drawing them closer. One year after George's passing, in the workshop where it all began, William knelt before Lucy with a small velvet box in his hand. Inside was a ring with a delicate design that matched the scroll of her grandmother's violin. On their wedding day, Lucy played that same violin, its sweet notes filling the garden of their now shared home. The music school continued to grow, touching more lives than George could have imagined. Each year, they awarded the George Harrison Scholarship to promising young musicians who showed not just talent, but kindness. Rain fell softly outside as Lucy taught a young student using her grandmother's violin. The child's eyes lit up as she drew the bow across the strings, creating her first clear note. Lucy smiled, remembering the rainy evening that had started it all. In that moment, she could almost hear George's gentle laugh echoing through the halls, his legacy living on through every note played within these walls.